You know, people often say that words don't leave bruises. But if you've spent any time listening to someone in their 70s or 80s, you'll realize that's just not true. A simple phrase, spoken without much thought, can stick in an elderly person's mind for days, weeks, sometimes even years. I've sat with seniors in quiet living rooms, across small tables in nursing homes, and in park benches under fading autumn skies. And again I hear them say things like, "It feels like I don't matter anymore," or "They talk around me, not to me." It's not just about being polite. It's about dignity, identity, and something deeper, the quiet erosion of spirit that happens when people stop choosing their words with care. In this episode of Elderly Reflections, we're going to look at 3 common phrases that break a senior's spirit. And just as importantly, we'll explore how to heal with words, how to speak with wisdom, kindness, and presence. Because if there's one thing I've learned from elderly wisdom, it's this: words can hurt, but they can also lift, restore, and remind someone of their worth. Let me ask you something. Have you ever said something simple, maybe even well-meaning, to an older person, only to see a shadow pass over their face? Maybe you didn't notice it. Or maybe, like me, you only recognized it years later, when you look back and realize that moment mattered more than you thought. Because here's the truth no one talks about enough. After 65, words don't just inform or entertain, they shape identity. They affirm dignity, or they chip away at it. You see, by the time someone turns 70, they've likely buried loved ones, seen their body change in ways they couldn't control, and maybe watched their social circle shrink one funeral at a time. In that fragile space, where every connection becomes more precious, the words people use around them carry more weight than ever. And yet, so often, we speak without thinking. I've spent the last 10 years interviewing seniors across the US, Canada, the UK, and even small retirement villages in Germany and Sweden. And while languages may change, the pain doesn't. A 78-year-old man in Kentucky told me, "They say you won't remember anyway," like it's a joke. But it makes me feel broken. A woman in her 80s from Manchester, England shared through tears, "When they say, 'Don't worry about it, Grandma,' I feel invisible." And a retired teacher in Oslo said it best, "Words used to matter in my classroom. Now it feels like they don't matter when they're about me." What we're dealing with here isn't just a problem of insensitive language. It's a deep cultural blind spot. We've created a world obsessed with youth, speed, and performance. And in doing so, we've unintentionally made aging feel like a slow erasure. Seniors often tell me that the hardest part of growing older isn't the physical pain or the loneliness. It's the quiet sense that they're no longer being seen, no longer being heard, that their voice has become background noise. Let me share with you a memory that still haunts me. Years ago, I was visiting my great-uncle Harold, a proud World War II vet and former engineer. He was 92, sharp as a tack, but his hand shook a little when he poured coffee. That day, my cousin, well-meaning, younger, reached over and said, "Here, let me do it. You don't want to make a mess, right?" She smiled. Uncle Harold didn't. He looked down, quietly handed over the pot, and for the rest of the visit barely spoke. Only later did he tell me, "I built bridges with those hands. Now people act like I can't even pour a cup of coffee." That, right there, was the moment I understood what breaking someone's spirit really meant. Here's what's even more important to understand. The breaking doesn't happen all at once. It's not one phrase that does it. It's the accumulation, a slow drip of subtle dismissals, jokes that sting, or overly simplified instructions that imply someone is no longer capable of thinking for themselves. It's a nurse in a hospital room speaking to the adult child instead of the patient. It's a grocery clerk saying "sweetie" in a tone that sounds more like pity than kindness. It's a family member talking louder and slower, as if age automatically means ignorance. These moments aren't always meant to harm. That's the painful part. They come from a place of wanting to help, or trying to be gentle. But intent doesn't cancel impact. Not when someone is already feeling like their value is fading with each passing year. There's a word I use often in this work: erosion. Not explosion, erosion, because the spirit of an older adult isn't usually shattered, it's worn down, over time, by 1,000 small phrases that carry big consequences. When someone hears, "You already told me that," it can feel like you're becoming a burden. When they hear, "You wouldn't understand," it can sound like you don't matter anymore. When they hear, "It's just part of getting old," what they internalize is, "Stop complaining, stop being you." Now here's something that might surprise you. In my conversations with seniors from many backgrounds, education levels, and even languages, 3 phrases came up again and again. Phrases that caused the most harm. Not because they were cruel, but because they made people feel dismissed, diminished, or disconnected from their own identity. We're going to talk about those three in the next section. But before we do, I want you to sit with something. How many times have you used a phrase out of convenience? Not cruelty, but it still landed wrong. I've done it. I've said, "Don't worry about it," to my father when he repeated a question. I've said, "You wouldn't remember," to my aunt when we talked about something from last week. And you know what? I saw it. The flicker. That second of silence where the hurt settles in. And I promised myself, no more, because what seniors are asking for isn't special treatment. It's not about tiptoeing around them or treating them like fragile glass. It's about seeing them fully, as people with decades of experience, wisdom, mistakes, and triumphs. It's about recognizing that their worth doesn't decline with age, it deepens. And when we ignore that, we don't just lose their voice, motivation, and inspiration that can only come from elderly wisdom. So let's talk about the words. The exact phrases that, time and again, show up in conversations that leave seniors feeling small, invisible, or even broken. I'll walk you through three of them. Phrases that might sound harmless on the surface, but cut deep when spoken in the wrong tone, at the wrong time, or with the wrong assumption. Phrase 1. You already told me that. Now I know what you're thinking. It doesn't sound mean, it even feels practical. You're busy, you're in a rush, you don't want to hear the same story again. But imagine this. What if that story is all someone has left to hold on to? She told me about her late husband, Frank. Every time I visited, same story. How they met at a church dance in 1958, how he wore scuffed shoes and spilled punch on her dress. She laughed every time she told it. One day I asked her niece who lived with her if it ever got tiring hearing that story, again and again. And she said, honestly, I always want to say, Aunt Ethel, you already told me that, but I bite my tongue. Because I know she's not just telling a story, she's reliving a piece of her life where she still felt whole. When we say you already told me that, we're not just pointing out repetition, we're signaling that we've stopped listening, that their words don't matter anymore. And for many seniors whose days are quieter and lonelier, that's one of the cruelest messages we can send. What should we say instead? Try this. I remember this story. I love when you talk about it. Or just smile and let them tell it again. Because stories from the elderly aren't just memories, they're bridges from who they were to who they still want to be remembered as. Phrase 2, it's just part of getting old. Now this one hurts the most, because it's usually said with a shrug, a wave of the hand. A doctor says it when your back aches. A daughter says it when you're struggling with your phone. A caregiver says it when you forget a name. But let me be clear, aging is not the problem. Dismissing someone's pain, fear, or frustration as just aging is. I remember Robert from Manchester, England. A former accountant, he was a man of routines and sharp suits. When I met him, he was 76 and newly diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. He told me that when he first noticed a tremor in his hand, he went to his GP. The doctor looked at him and said, "Well, that's just part of getting old." No tests, no referrals, no concern, just a line that made him feel like his body no longer deserved investigation. It took months before another doctor took him seriously, by which time his symptoms had worsened. But what stayed with Robert wasn't just the delay in diagnosis, it was how quickly someone dismissed his reality. He told me that sentence made me feel like my pain didn't matter, like the clock had run out on being treated like a person. Here's what people forget. Aging is normal, but suffering in silence is not. When we say it's just part of getting old, we risk invalidating very real experiences. Whether it's chronic pain, anxiety, memory loss, or grief, none of it deserves to be brushed aside. A better way to respond? Try, "Let's look into it together." Or, "That sounds frustrating, how can I help?" Because when we take a senior's concerns seriously, we remind them that their comfort still matters, that they haven't been written off by the world, or worse, by the people they love. Phrase 3, you wouldn't understand. I heard this one more often than I expected. And I'll be honest, it broke my heart every time. It usually comes from a place of impatience or even protection. Maybe you're talking about something tech or politics or a family issue, and instead of explaining, you just wave them off with a quick, "You wouldn't understand." But here's the problem with that. It assumes that aging equals irrelevant, that someone who's lived through world wars, civil rights movements, the birth of the internet, and maybe even survived personal tragedies you'll never know, suddenly can't grasp your world. That's not just unfair, That's disrespectful. In Minnesota, I spoke with an elderly gentleman named Thomas. He was 91, still drove himself to church every Sunday. His granddaughter had recently come out to the family as non-binary. There was tension. One of the younger relatives said during dinner, "Well, Grandpa wouldn't understand. He's from another time." And Thomas, but later in private, he told me, "I may be from another time, but I'm still here. I can still learn. I want to understand." He cried when he said that. Not because he was offended, but because he felt cut off from his own family, from the evolving world, from a chance to love someone better. But it made me realize this phrase doesn't just deny comprehension, it denies connection. So what can we say instead? How about, "It's kind of complicated, but I'd love to explain it if you're interested." Or, "This might be new, but I think you'll get it." Because here's the truth. Most seniors don't expect to have all the answers, but they do want to be included in the questions. We forget how adaptable our elders can be. Many of them have survived economic crashes, cultural revolutions, and even personal reinventions. So why should we assume they're incapable of understanding us now? In Elderly Reflections, I've heard countless stories of seniors learning new languages in their 80s, using smartphones at 90, even starting new relationships after losing their spouse. The only thing stopping them from growing is not their age, it's the belief that they can't. So what do we do now? Once we know the damage these phrases can cause, how they quietly erode a senior's spirit, what do we say instead? How do we begin to repair the invisible cracks, to lift someone back into? You don't need to be a psychologist or a poet. You don't need grand gestures or dramatic speeches. You just need to slow down, look someone in the eye, and choose your words with care. Take Mrs. Klein from Ontario. She's 87, lives alone in a small home filled with books, hand-sewn curtains, and memories. For years, she said she felt spoken around, not spoken to. Her children meant well, but they'd finish her sentences, interrupt her when she struggled to remember a word, or talk about her like she wasn't in the room. Then one day, her grandson came to visit. He didn't say much. He just sat with her, no TV, no phone. And when she forgot what she was trying to say, he waited, patiently, gently. And finally, she smiled and said, "You make me feel like I still matter." That visit changed everything. It reminded her she was still a person, not a project. That's the power of mindful language, of presence, of giving someone the space to be whole, even if it takes them longer to find the words. Here's another example. James, a former firefighter from Philadelphia, told me how his adult son used to say, "Don't worry, Dad, I've got it." Every time James tried to help with something, lifting groceries, fixing a light, offering advice, it felt loving, but over time, James began to withdraw. "I don't want to be a burden," he said, "so I just stay out of the way now." But then his son did something different. He said, "Dad, I know you've done this 100 times. Want to show me the best way?" Just like that, the dynamic changed. It wasn't about ability. It was about dignity. And dignity, my friend, that. When we talk about senior health, we often think of blood pressure, joints, memory. But emotional health, that's just as vital. The right words used with kindness can stabilize more than mood. They can lower anxiety, improve connection, and even, according to recent studies, delay cognitive decline by keeping the brain engaged through meaningful conversation. At Elderly Reflections, we often share quotes and life lessons from the elderly, not because they're poetic, but because they're true. And one that stayed with me is this: I don't need people to fix me. I need them to remember that I still exist. So let's remember them. When someone repeats a story, respond with curiosity, not correction. When they express a fear, answer with compassion, not dismissal. When they fumble with technology or forget a name, offer patience, not pity. If you don't know what to say this: "Take your time, I'm here," or "I love hearing this, it matters to me." Because sometimes healing doesn't come from grand speeches. It comes from small, sincere reassurances. And let me tell you, this shift in language, it doesn't just heal them, it heals us too. It deepens our relationships, it strengthens our sense of humanity, and it allows us to age better ourselves. Because one day we'll be the ones sitting in that chair, searching for words, hoping someone still sees us. So what have we learned? That phrases like, "You already told me that," "It's just part of getting old," and "You wouldn't understand" may seem harmless, but they leave behind real wounds. And yet, with just a shift in how we speak, we can offer healing instead of hurt. We can create a space where seniors feel seen, respected, and above all, remembered. Let's choose words that honor experience, not erase it. Let's speak to our elders not with pity, but with presence. Let's replace dismissal with dignity and impatience with empathy. And maybe, just maybe, one day when we're sitting in that same chair, we'll be lucky enough to hear the same kindness echo back to us. If this touched you in some way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Elderly Reflections. We believe every story, every voice, every wrinkle carries wisdom. I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and tell us about a phrase that made you feel seen, or one that you wish people would stop using. Let's learn from each other. Let's speak with care.